Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. I have been searching for a keto pasta recipe, and I made several messes and threw them in the trash and decided I would start from scratch. So I decided I would stop trying to find a keto pasta recipe and I would just make one up. So this video will be of just the macaroni, and then I'll show you how it works in macaroni and cheese and point you to a video on how to make the cheese sauce. Now before we get cooking, just remember, if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe, click the little bell at the top right and you'll get a notice when I post new videos. Now let's get cooking. So we'll go over the ingredients. This is CarbQuick, and I've shown you this in a couple of videos. This is good stuff for baking. And I measured out 1.5 cups. Now this doesn't quite have the consistency of flour, and I'll show you how I'm going to deal with that as we go along. This is Vital Wheat Gluten. It's not expensive. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it in some grocery stores. And I have 3 tablespoons of that. This is 1 tablespoon of flour and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Bread flour is what I'm using. If you have semolina, you can use that. 1 tablespoon olive oil, 2 eggs. Now, if you make pasta, you know this is pretty close to a regular pasta recipe. And in pasta, the texture comes from developing the gluten, which has 2 grams of carbs per tablespoonful, by the way. And CarbQuick doesn't have the necessary gluten, so we're going to put it back in. So here is my food processor. I've put the CarbQuick and the gluten in here. 1.5 cups of CarbQuick and 3 tablespoons full of gluten. We're only going to use about 1 cup, maybe 1.25 cups in the actual recipe. And I'll need some for dusting. When you make pasta, you have to have some for dusting. So I'm going to take somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 cup out. It's not exact. Probably I should have measured, but this works just fine. And then I'll set that aside and save it for when I start working the pasta and forming it into a shape. Now this Vital Wheat Gluten, you know, it's kind of amazing stuff. If you do any research on the properties of flour, here I'm going to add my little bit of flour. And by the way, that 1 tablespoonful of flour has 6 grams of carbs, and I'm going to give you a carb count in the info section along with a list of the ingredients and quantities. So I mix that up, and I do that in a food processor because you really can't sift CarbQuick properly. Now in go my 2 eggs. I beat them ahead of time, and then I'm going to add my little bit of oil, and I'm going to just blend this all together in this food processor until we get what looks like a granular texture, and I'll show that to you. In learning to cook with CarbQuick, I've really had to study the properties of how it rehydrates, and you just don't want to get it too moist. It differs from regular flour in that it has leavening in it, so we're going to have to try to offset that leavening. So you see, this is the texture I'm going for. It'll stick together, but it's in little pebbles. So I've turned it out onto a Silpat liner here, and I'm just going to work it all together. Now at some point this is going to get kneaded, but right now I'm just trying to get all the little pebbles incorporated in and form this into a sort of a round disc so that I can let it rest. This is pretty stiff, and you might want to try to loosen this up a little bit. I warn you ahead of time, don't. Everything you're doing with CarbQuick when you're making something other than like a quick bread, is to try to sort of offset that leavening that's in there, and you don't want too much water. You know, you can buy the carbulose flour that is the basis for CarbQuick, but the carb count on it is much higher. And I may at some point buy some and try it, but right now I'm pretty happy with what I'm getting from the CarbQuick. It's not exactly like using plain flour, but you can get pretty close results. And I've read some reviews, and I understand that the CarbQuick has a better base flavor than the carbulose flour. CarbQuick doesn't taste exactly like flour. There's a little bit of difference. But, you know, if you're learning to cook keto, or if you're eating keto for an extended period of time, you're getting used to a little bit different flavor. This is just about as close as I have come. So this is really stiff. I'm really pressing on it and sort of rolling it into a ball. One thing about cooking with CarbQuick is you have to give it a chance. You have to let it rest and rehydrate. So I've just formed this into a kind of a disc, and I'm going to cover it with a clean dish towel and just let it sit and rest for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll come back and start kneading this dough. So it's rested for about 20 minutes. And let's see what we've got here. We're going to knead it now, and it needs to be kneaded for about 5 minutes. And it's pretty dry. So what I'm going to do, I don't want to add water. It's hard to get just a little water. So what I'm going to do is just wet my hands. And I'll do this 2 or 3 times as I'm kneading it. And you know, you can do this in your mixer, in your KitchenAid. You can do the whole thing after you process the CarbQuick to get it a little bit thinner and smoother. You can make the whole stuff, the whole thing in your KitchenAid or whatever kind of mixer you have, and then you can knead it right there. The only thing is, you want to keep this drier than you normally would pasta. If you introduce too much liquid into this, your finished product is going to be very puffy and not as sturdy. So this is not really that hard to knead. It's a little dry, but it's getting a little moisture as we go. And I'm adding just the moisture from wetting my hands, and I do that about 3 times total. And what we're doing here is developing that gluten. And that 1 little tablespoonful of flour we put helps the gluten develop. So let me just show you. You want to have a little bit of elasticity in this. So if I press down on it, you see it pulls back. Just a little bit. And maybe if I needed this more, it would be a little bit more elastic, but that's about all my hands are going to take today. But you can see how it comes back just a little, and that's the elasticity you get from the gluten forming. So I think that we're going to be okay with this. We're going to let it rest again. Let me form it back into a ball. And these rests that I'm showing you are very important in this process. So I'll cover it, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes. So while this was resting, I got out my KitchenAid pasta extruder. You can use a manual extruder, or you can run this through the rollers and cut it into noodles. I want macaroni, so I'm going to use the extruder. And for that process, I'm going to cut this into several small pieces. And I'll do just a little bit more kneading. I'll knead each piece. But we form it into little balls. And then we put the little balls down in the extruder, and it spits out macaroni. or it'll spit out spaghetti or linguine, just according to what you want. Lots of different ways. However you normally form your pasta is going to work with this. And if you don't usually make pasta, you're only trying it now because you're craving pasta because you've been eating keto and sometimes you just want pasta so much, then I'll show you the whole process. So I've put a little of the reserved CarbQuick mixture on my board, and just enough to make sure it doesn't stick. It needs a little bit of this to go smoothly through the extractor. And you need each one just a little. And I'll show you the texture we've got here after it's been kneaded several times. It really lets go. It's a lot looser, a lot easier to work with after that last rest. And I'm just putting enough of the flour, the CarbQuick mixture, on here to make it less sticky. And then we just start dropping the little balls into the extruder. I have it turned on, and I'll just put the little balls in until it comes up to the top, and then I've got a little presser to press it down. The KitchenAid is on. And you just do that by the directions. I actually run it on speed 4. I think it calls for speed 2, but speed 2 is so slow. So let me close up, and you can see when it starts running through. I actually have a little manual extruder, but my hands are pretty tired from kneading, so I'm going to use the KitchenAid. And it'll be coming through in just a second. There you go. You can see it start to come through. And I'm going to cut the little ends off here because they're really rough. And I'll form that back into a ball and add it back in. I won't waste it. So, you know, you can cut this any length you want. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. And now, see, my arm is blocking. But it's got this little wire cutter. And you can see from this that this has the texture of fresh pasta. And I'm going to let a few of these run through, and then I'll show you what we've got. There you go. So this is the pasta that's coming out. And the rest of this process is all the same, so I'm not going to make you watch it. But I do want you to see that this has the texture of pasta. I've made several other people's recipes of what should turn out to be pasta at the end. And a couple of them are good, but they're not pasta. And I've tried some of my own that are good, but they're not pasta. I've really wasted an awful lot of coconut flour and oat fiber and all of those things that you use as alternatives to flour. But my best results have been with CarbQuick, and I don't sell it, and I don't get anything for recommending it. I just like it. So here's the finished product. It's not exactly like regular flour pasta. It's pretty darn close. Adding up the ingredients, I believe it's 22.2 grams of carbs for this whole pan full. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of the CarbQuick mixture over this and roll it around a little bit, stir it around a little bit so it doesn't stick. I have figured this, because you know it swells, I have figured this as 4 servings if you're having it as a main dish, and 6 servings if you're doing it as a side dish. So your carb count's pretty low. As I say, I will itemize all that in the info section, but I'm pretty happy with this. So now I'm going to refrigerate this uncovered for at least 4 hours. 8 is better and 12 is okay. And warning, don't skip this step. So it has dried out some. It's been about 4 hours. I'm going to show you how this holds up to cooking. Now I'm making a Mornay sauce here. I will post you a link for how to make a Mornay sauce. And I've got some water boiling here with about a teaspoonful of salt and a little bit of olive oil. By the way, in the Mornay sauce, I substituted CarbQuick for flour, and we've got about another 22 grams. So here we go. I'm just going to drop this into the water. I didn't have it at a rolling boil, but it had started to boil. And I'm going to drop this in. And I'm being a little bit careful with it, because while it has a really good texture, it's not quite as sturdy as regular flour pasta. It's the closest I've come in all my attempts. See, it's got some texture there. And when I get it all in and it comes back to a boil, not a rolling boil, a good simmer, then I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. You don't really want to cook it more than about 3 minutes. So when it's cooked 3 minutes, I will come back. So it's been about 3 minutes, and I have my trusty spider here, and I'm just going to move that around a little bit to make sure nothing's stuck, and nothing's stuck, and that's a miracle. For a low-carb pasta, for a keto pasta, it's not stuck together, it stayed separate. So instead of pouring it into a colander in this sink, just because I am being careful with it, I'm going to dip this out using my spider, and I'll just let it drain. And look at that. That's macaroni. Yes, it is. Took a lot of work to get here and a lot of wasted ingredients. But now I'll make this regularly. So I just drain it as I go, and I'm putting it right over in the Mornay sauce. And this sauce is very white because I used mozzarella and white cheddar. And so I am adding a little black pepper, just because in macaroni and cheese I like a lot of black pepper. Now, it was salted as we went. I put salt in the water, and I'm just going to gently fold this pasta in. See all that nice stringy cheese? I probably could have done with a little less Mornay sauce for this, but that's okie dokie. You just can never have too much cheese. Now, the Mornay sauce, as I say, turned out to 22 grams, 22 point something grams of carbs. You can make this even lower carb by not using so much cream. I think you can use it with your macaroni and cheese recipe. So I have some Colby slices here. Normally I would grate cheese on the top, but I don't have any block cheese, and I have Colby slices. So I'm just going to put some slices on top. I've preheated my oven to 350. And I'm going to set the timer for about 20 minutes. Just enough time to melt the cheese. And I'm going to clean up my pan just a little bit. I've got a lot of cheese up around the edges. And that'll just crust. So 20 minutes. I cooked it 20 minutes. And then I put it under the broiler for about a minute and a half, just to get a little browning on the cheese on top. And you know, I realize I didn't taste it for salt. I hope it's okay. It's a little late to add it, but I'm going to give it a little taste. Anyway, that's the excuse I'm using. I need to check for salt. And I just want to check that texture of that pasta before I put it in the oven. And you know, it's holding up really well. It really is. It's macaroni. It is low carb, but it's macaroni. And here you go. Still bubbling out of the oven. Doesn't that look good? Doesn't it just make you want some? I've been craving macaroni and cheese for months, and this ought to do it. I'm going to plate this up. So here is my low-carb dinner. The mac and cheese is about 7 point something grams of carbs. I've got a little roast beef with some carrots and some asparagus. And I want you to check out this texture. I mean, it stays macaroni. It stays separate. It has some texture. It's al dente, and oh, it tastes so good. Of course, you know, if you put that much cheese on anything, it's going to taste great. But this really is macaroni, and it's the closest I've come after many attempts to actually having a low-carb keto pasta. See how that stands up? If you don't have all the equipment you need to make your own pasta, an extruder, a manual extruder, is about $14. Anything else you can do with a regular mixer or by hand. You really want to try this. If you're craving macaroni and you're bored on your keto diet, this is going to help. I really, really hope you try this recipe. Look at that. And I hope you love it as much as I do. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.